Hello, everyone. I'm Spencer Morgan. I'm the head of community at Element3 Health, and we are back with another episode of our weekly Facebook Live show, People and Their Passions, with an exclamation. Every week we talk to a new guest and try to learn about their passions and the communities that support them. And so I'm going to hand it over to Jen, our Element3 Health painting and drawing club leader, to introduce our special guest.
So I am so excited for our guest today, in part because I got to meet him several months ago through Spencer, but he was actually a guest in our painting and drawing club, and we just had such a blast with him, and he's still brought up all the time. So it was definitely a hit. So I'm so excited that Bruce Cody is here with us today. He has 17 years experience as a university art teacher, which is amazing. And he, in 1983, before I was even born, left his professorship and transitioned his life to painting. And so I'm so excited to welcome you here with us today, Bruce. So welcome.
Thank you very much.
So I'm going to go ahead and start by asking you, how did you discover art and what made you decide to make a career of painting and teaching art?
My father was involved in the sign business, and I had an interest in watching what he was producing. But during World War II, we lived out in San Francisco. He was in the military in the recruiting office. When the war ended, he started taking some painting lessons from a instructor there. And on a couple of occasions, I went over to the studio where he was studying. And one time they commandeered me into posing. So at that point, I had to decide, was I going to be a painter or a poser? And it turned out I became a painter instead. But we moved back to Wyoming, where I was born in 1947. And then when I entered grade school, it seemed like the thing I liked doing most was drawing. And I drew a lot at home, a lot at school. And gradually, I think I became kind of totally enamored by it. So by the time I got through high school, I had not, well, I'll put it this way. I wasn't the valedictorian of the high school. I was quite a number of slots down from the valedictorian, but I was probably the best artist in the high school. So when I went to the University of Wyoming, my parents wanted me to do something other than art. So I pretended I was in pre-med, but I took art classes. And by Christmas, I said, you know, this pre-med thing's going nowhere. I'm just not kind of interested in looking through a microscope at protozoa. I'd rather look through my eyes at still lifes or go out and paint from nature. So they kind of sighed and tried to convince me that I would go nowhere with it. And I said, well, I might teach or go into commercial graphic design. So that's how I got started, was seriously getting involved at university level. And then after graduating, I got married. And as all of you might know, that sort of wakes you up to reality. When that baby is there eventually and you're helping at night with the little chores, you get serious about life. So I decided the best thing was to go into teaching. And fortunately, I got a job in a university after 2 years of graduate school. So that's how I got to where I was. And then there's a lot that has gone on between that point and today. So that's where we are.
Wow, I love that you did end up following your heart, Bruce. You know, a lot of people don't get that opportunity or they're not that brave. So that's really cool that you were able to do that. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on the value and importance of finding a community of people to support your passion. And what kind of experiences did you have with building communities around your art?
Oh, I think that's probably the most critical thing. I think it's more important than talent, actually. I think that if you have some people that believe you've got some strong motivation to pursue some particular thing, that's more helpful than a lot of the education one gets. I had a couple teachers in high school who knew that I was not going to go into law school or medical school, and they encouraged me in high school to really get serious about drawing and painting. And I'm forever indebted to them for that encouragement. And then I had friends in high school. One of them says, why don't we go up to the junior college and take painting class from this new guy that's in town that is trying to do a night class. So we did that together. There were three of us. All three of us went to art schools at various places. Three of us did some teaching, and one of the three then went into commercial art pretty soon after he finished art school. But that community is of critical importance, I think, whether it's family that's encouraging or close friends driving around in a car, or teachers, or people in, I met a lady once at the county fair, and she said, oh, my son says you draw really well. Would you come over to our house? I want to show you some of my work. Her work was so exciting to me that it encouraged me to keep going, that I was kind of off on sort of a silly group of tangents. And I could see that she was focused. She'd have series of paintings of things in her garden, and then series of still lifes she'd do during the winter. And she talked to me about working in series. And I didn't give a lot of thought to it until several years later, when in the teaching community, one of the new teachers who came when I was teaching Colorado State University came over for dinner, and he says, oh, you've got all the fundamentals and you really know what you're doing, but you're doing 75 different things. Why don't you get focused on 2 or 3 topics? And so that's what kind of led me into a series of paintings doing the freeways on I-25. I wound up painting I-25 overpasses and underpasses from Casper, Wyoming to Santa Fe, New Mexico over a 3-year period. And that led me into more serious activity than when I would go with my wife down to Denver. She had a job there after I was thinking of starting to break off university. She was smart and got a job right away before I even resigned. And I'd go down with her and I'd paint around Denver. And then when I finally decided I want to take a leave of absence and see if I can do this on my own, she had a job which helped, but it was this working in a series that made a difference. We took a sabbatical in 1976 and 77 to England. And part of my point of taking the sabbatical was to get out of where we lived, get out of the United States so I couldn't get back to Colorado easily, and paint as often as the weather would allow and see if I actually had the self-discipline. Now, I had one friend in England who was very encouraging that we'd met when I was teaching in Wisconsin. So his encouragement and his wife's encouragement in a way also stimulated me to work hard. But it was that self-discipline, but a tiny community there. I met a couple art instructors at various universities or college, art colleges, as they handle them in England, in London, and they were encouraging. So answering that question again about community, that is very, very critical. And fortunately, that's become recognized. What Spencer has set up is probably a very, very important issue on a very wide scale. I know here in Sun City, the people I work with as my students are also my friends. And they're encouraging me and I'm encouraging them. And some of them have grown so much by the repetition of once a week being in a class situation, working with other people. The other people around them are as helpful to them as I am. I'm just sort of a connector between people. And I don't teach people anything that they have to do to make art. I let them gradually build on what they see around them from their peers and things I suggest as possibilities. They each have unique personalities. And just yesterday I was with a group, and one of the women has a very strong tendency in her oil painting to draw with her brush. And she said to me, well, I've been told I shouldn't do that. And I said, whoever told you that's putting you on the wrong track. Do it the way you want to do it. There's no formula. There's no right and wrong. There's good, better, and best. But we're just after doing what's good for you. And again, that community, there were only 5 of us there, but the other 4 people, there were 6 of us with me. I keep forgetting I'm there. They were the ones that encouraged her more. I just had to trigger the conversation, and they were able to stimulate her. And I think their encouragement was more valuable than mine, because she could look to them and say, oh, you've been there too. They know I've been somewhere, but they operate on the premise that I'm supposed to know everything there is. And I know very little. I know how to stimulate people. And I know how gradually to get them to grow and lead toward what they want to do. But I don't say, this is how you do it, and everybody else is wrong. I know what's best. I don't do that. But I had teachers that did that, and it was very stifling.
Hi, Bruce. It's so nice to meet you. I want to know who are your muses and influences. Where do you find your inspiration? Is it nature or other artists? Can you kind of talk about that?
I think something very important that is art history. I look at a lot of art history throughout a year's time. The other thing I think is very important and stimulating is to read either facts or fiction, whichever you prefer, but get your mind off of painting or off of drawing. I think there's a need to cross-ventilate, which means have a catharsis. And sometimes the catharsis comes from reading a novel or reading a factual book. But I read a lot of art history, and I try to convey art historical examples to my students, especially in drawing. I think there's so many great examples of draftsmanship historically that help students to see what a pencil and a piece of charcoal can accomplish. And that pencil is a piece of magic. And those cavemen that figured out some way of making marks on walls in Spain and elsewhere, putting charcoal on that wall and then learning, this is a very clever thing somebody came up with at some point. Put their hand up there and blew charcoal around it and left a naked mark there of a hand in space with the charcoal all around it. That's a remarkable thing, and that's a very factor. And drawing is the first phase of art history. And it's the first phase, oddly enough, of what a person ought to be trying to do as an art student. And again, a lot of students want to skip that, like I wanted to skip the scales on a clarinet, and I wanted to play like Benny Goodman before I could even do the scales. But had I had brains at that age, I would have done my scales and gotten better at the clarinet, and I might not have gone into art. I might have just been a musician, I don't know. But the fundamentals of learning art, I think, can be seen in art history. That's why I talk about it. Now, you ask who's the inspiration. Okay, there's Johannes Vermeer in Holland. There's Rembrandt, who was at the same time. I am very taken by Renaissance and late Renaissance chiaroscuro with various painters that really pushed the lights and darks. And then I moved up in my mind toward Impressionism and what was the genuine Impressionism, which was the breaking away from the French Academy and doing much looser out on location painting by a few artists. And then we have Post-Impressionism, which we tend to call Impressionism. We have Degas and Monet and Lautrec and eventually Van Gogh. I find them very inspiring. Most students, I think, are in love with Impressionism because it looks like it's easy because there's lots of little marks. You don't have to be a big sweeping painter. You can go pop, 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 put purple here, put purple there, put purple over here, follow up with orange, follow up with yellow, follow up with green. And it is a stimulating thing when they learn that what the Impressionists, Post-Impressionists were trying to do was imitate in pigment the phenomenon of light waves. And talking to them about Impressionism and what it was about changes their attitude about it. They either find it then more stimulating or more baffling. They don't find a solution. They discover that they have to start thinking in terms of color, relationships, going from yellow to orange to red, creates a volume. And then I'm influenced by probably the period of artists in the Depression, like Raphael Sawyer and Edward Hopper. And I would say, based on what you're seeing behind me in that wall, you know that I love Edward Hopper. I did this painting of the Nighthawks as a gift to the right person who came through our gallery at a certain time at an opening. And there was some complicated things involved and I wound up owning it. But I picked that painting as a thing for this special opening of the entire street in Santa Fe, because Edward Hopper reaches across to almost everybody in this country that looks at painting. Not everybody looks at painting, of course, but when you go into a museum like the Art Institute of Chicago or the Whitney in New York and you see his paintings, I've seen people actually just slam to a stop because it's so powerful and it communicates to them on such an instant basis. Now, they may be people who have seen reproductions of it like I had for 20, 25 years before I actually saw the actual fact. But again, his influence on me is very strong. I try not to imitate him, but you know, it's hard not to imitate your parents too. So there is some kind of connection that comes through unconsciously with me with Edward Hopper more than any other artist. And it's partly because I like architectural form and I like geometry. I've got to take a drink of water. I'm getting dry. Does anyone else have a question?
Hi, yes, Bruce. I have a question. So many things have shifted to online now, as you're, I'm sure aware. So how would you say that the internet and YouTube and things like Zoom meetings have changed the landscape for someone who's interested in pursuing art?
Oh, I wish it would have existed 60 years ago when I got serious. I think it's absolutely phenomenal. YouTube is the source of everything I put up on our drawing and painting channel. And there are some really, really, really good artists out there. The number of great artists in this country just blows my mind. And it didn't exist 60 years ago. There were not the number of artists there are today. And I think two things happened. We had art being taught in universities, which reached a lot of people. That art was either based on what was going on at the time for most art students. When I was in art school from 60 to 66, or in university, it wasn't an art school, it was a university with an art department. Every one of those teachers was caught up in abstract expressionism. And I'm trying to develop an ability to draw well when I'm in college, and they're saying, oh, you've got to learn to express yourself. What the hell did I have to express myself about? I'm 19 years old. I barely lived. I mean, I barely got through high school. What am I going to express? So I wanted to draw. And there was one teacher that understood what I was talking about who encouraged it. The others were all painters and sculptors that were doing essentially abstract, non-objective, or very distorted things of human shapes, organic things that were very distorted. I found that that community created confusion. I had to gradually just accept the fact that I wasn't going to be an abstract expressionist painter. Then I went to graduate school, and pop art was really going strong at that point. I remember in 62 seeing Andy Warhol soup cans. I think it was 62 or 63. And I thought, God, that's like sign painting. Is sign painting legitimate? My dad was a sign painter. He taught me how to sign paint. I did a lithograph of a circus poster that had lettering in it. Everyone said, what are you trying to be, a pop artist? And it made no connection to me that that's what someone would think. I was experiencing what I did at my dad's shop in the summertime. We designed a poster for a local Kiwanis club that was sponsoring a circus. And it took a long time for me to find a community that understood what I wanted. Today, you can go to YouTube. If you don't want to be an abstract painter, you don't have to look at those videos. You don't have to listen to some professor prattling on about Jackson Pollock's heroic concept. You don't have to look at superrealism if you're not interested. That's what's really great about the community today. All the things that are available. Every town, it's amazing to me how many art galleries there are in the United States today. When I was in high school and college, there weren't very many art galleries around. They were kind of available at a gift shop. Some local artists would do some things that were consigned into a gift shop. But genuine, bona fide, standalone art galleries with a knowledgeable person selling quality art was a pretty rare thing. Today, places like Charleston and Dallas and Santa Fe and Taos and Denver and Seattle, you name it, Scottsdale, Arizona, gallery everywhere. Now, there's thousands of artists, there's thousands of paintings. A person can walk in a gallery and encounter 25 to 30 artists. And if they want to, they can encounter 10 to 15 paintings by each of those artists. That was not available when I was young. I had no place to go look at art. The first time I saw Edward Hopper was in 1959 when my parents took me to Chicago. And I got to go through the Art Institute. But I don't remember going to the Young Museum in San Francisco when I was 4 years old. I mean, that just doesn't register. We may have done that, I don't know. But my first experience in a genuine museum that I recall is 1959. And today, everybody can virtually go to every museum in the world. We can, we can go to the Hermitage in Russia right now. We can close this down and all go see something at the Hermitage. And that's the important thing today about learning to do art. An art student today has the whole cornucopia of art available. I had the apple and the orange. That was essentially it. Either abstract art as practiced by my teachers or realism as practiced by Norman Rockwell on the front of the Saturday Evening Post. And my teachers all said, that's not good art, that's crummy art. Who is it that is the most popular, most expensive, non-so-called fine artist in the world today? It's that so-called dumb illustrator. And what's he compared to? Johannes Vermeer, 350 years ahead of his time of showing a little fragment of daily life. Okay, Norman Rockwell was inventing a quality about America that was fictional. Up to a certain point, it was fiction. It also contained a big dose of reality. We were a country that was expanding. Young kids respected authority. Adults participated in democracy. It was an amazing time that he illustrated. And my faculty members thought he was a poor artist. He was a really good artist. He painted better than Edward Hopper. Edward Hopper's paintings are stiff compared to Norman Rockwell. Norman Rockwell had such great, smooth skills. It's just phenomenal. And all those illustrators of that period were terrific painters. And today's best painters of realism, many of them come out of the illustration activity that sort of fizzled out in the 1980s. I wanted to go into illustration, and my teacher said, well, illustration's dead, photography's taking over. And photography did gradually take over. But it was amazing how many good painters of today, like in the Western art motif, what used to be called the cowboy artists of America, they almost all of them had been illustrators in New York or Los Angeles or Chicago. And some of the better younger painters today have gone through the ranks of illustration in advertising agencies. So one of the things that's interesting today is we have whatever kind of art someone wants to make, it's considered legitimate. From photorealism to installations on the floor of a museum, stacking bricks up and hope they don't fall over. That's considered a very hot topic in the art world by some people. For me, it's like having the bricklayers come over and build a wall for me. But, you know, we have this broad definition of what art is, and I think that's great. You know, it's like a menu. You go out for a really fine dinner, you don't want just one choice. You want to have all these things you can savor, you can smell it in the air. You go in a museum, you've got all these choices. It's fabulous. And here's all this that happens on YouTube. There's nothing better. I wish it had existed when I was young. And there's still great books being published on art. When we moved from Santa Fe down to Sun City, I sold probably 75 or 80 of my art books that were mostly instructional books, some of which I would loan to students at the Art Students League in Denver when I was teaching there. But there's still lots of great books being published. You won't find them at places like Barnes & Noble. You've got to go to a museum, or you got to go to a really good books shop with someone who loves the publishing trade, which is not Barnes & Noble's attitude in their stores. I mean, they're just merchandisers. They don't, you know, if I've asked them at Barnes & Noble, can't you get more art history books? Oh, nobody buys them. Who would buy them? I said, I'd buy some of them. Come on, get them in here. They don't get them in,
Yeah.
you know.
That's why fortunately, you've got YouTube, right? And the internet.
Yeah, that's right. So I've prattled on probably long enough.
Right now, I have one last question for you, Bruce, and thank you so
Okay.
much. You really, this has been super interesting. But you mentioned the importance of community and how available they are, and how available all these resources on YouTube and the internet are. But we still encounter people who you know, hear a lot of people who are still a little bit intimidated to take the step to, you know, embrace their instinct to want to try to draw or paint, and maybe feel a little bit insecure about finding their style. So that's kind of two questions. What do you say to people who want to paint but they're want to do art of some kind, but they're a little bit stuck about starting and taking those first steps? And then secondly, do you have any keys to developing your own style?
I think people come to their own style naturally if they work frequently enough. They find things that mean something to them, which eventually comes out of style. In terms of getting them started, you know, in a way, that's a problem that a psychiatrist deals with. People either step up to the plate in life and in a club. You know, I have had people that I know are intimidated, and I say, there's nothing to be afraid of. There's no mistakes possible. I said, I can hand you some blue paint and some white paint and a canvas right now, and you'll paint a really good sky. There is no bad sky that you will paint. You put down some blue and some white, it reminds you of clouds. And if you want to make it look like a dog, that's fine. That's what your thought is, go for it. But you just have to take that step. It's, you know, it's a threshold in marriage. You go over that little spot on one side of the door, and you cross to the other. And that's all that drawing or painting is just stepping over a threshold. And just like marriage, it has give and take. I've been married almost 57 years next month. And marriage is just like drawing and painting. You do something, it's not quite right. You correct it and you keep on going. And people just have to step up. You know, I can't do it. I've never done it. I've always wanted it, but I've never done it. Now's the time. I've said to my classes, and this is kind of a common cliche today, but you're the youngest you're going to be. This is the oldest you've ever been today, but tomorrow you're going to look back at today being your youngest age, and you got to do something while you're still young and move forward. And it's time to do it. You know, if you're going to join an art club, join it, or come watch other people work. They don't mind. And pretty soon you get so curious, you go buy a sketch pad and some pencils. And pretty soon you get more excited and you go buy some pastels. Most people start with watercolor, which is the problem. If they would just start with drawing and not rush out to buy watercolor. And then they get so frustrated with watercolor, they say, I can never do this. And I say, of course you can do this. You don't have to do it the way your instructor does it. You don't have to wet the entire piece of paper and put in the whole sky at once. And then while it's just right, put in the background mountains. You don't have to do it that way. You can do it however you want. And pretty soon they're making watercolors that are reasonably good after 2 or 3 attempts. It's just amazing what the human mind and hand with a little bit of thought can do. But they got to jump over that threshold. If they can't, they need somebody's help other than yours and mine. That's about all I can say on that, Spencer.
Well, Bruce, it's been such a pleasure to have you. And just listening to you, it's no surprise that you've turned half of Sun City into a community of artists. And thank you for joining us for people and their passions.
Thank you for the opportunity. I enjoyed it very much. I hope it turns out to be useful to other people. Thanks again.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thanks
Thanks,
to all.
Bruce.
Take care.